Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Curtis Chang. Curtis is the founder and leader of the organization Good Faith, a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps Christians think about how to bridge the what many would see as the divide between faith and politics, and focuses, as you'll hear in the interview, a lot on the how as opposed to focusing exclusively on the what of politics. And rather than always being constantly obsessed, we might say, with the what of politics, policies, what kind of thing to try to get in place by hook or by crook, Curtis is asking us to focus more on the how, and that there's a great deal of wisdom in Scripture, especially places like the Sermon on the Mount, on the how, namely things like don't lie, like a refusal to demean one's opponent, like even the practice of loving one's enemies. Lots of fascinating conversation. But at the top of the interview, what you'll hear is a conversation about Curtis's experience as an immigrant. He and his family came to the United States from Taiwan when he was 3. And this is one of the things I have found myself increasingly interested in, I don't know why, in recent interviews, of asking questions about early childhood experience and how that has led to the kind of work someone has done in the world. And you'll hear a lot of remarkable conversation about Curtis's experience as an immigrant and how that has informed the kind of work he has sought to do in a number of different areas of work as what he calls a bridge builder, trying to find a way to get from one cultural specificity to another. Lovely conversation. Here's Curtis Chang. Enjoy.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
If you've ever blasted synth beats from your boombox or burned CDs for your besties, this one's for you. As people get older, much like their music tastes, their health needs change. AG1 is the simple daily health drink designed to deliver over 75 essential daily nutrients and pre- and probiotics to support energy, digestion, and mood, so you can make the most out of every decade and dance break. Learn more at drinkag1.com.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Curtis, welcome to No Small Endeavor.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we have a lot of friends in common, so it's nice that we finally get to talk and get to visit. So grateful to be with you. I wonder... maybe it's because I'm getting older myself, but I start to think about sometimes early childhood memories. And I wonder, what's your earliest childhood memory?
My earliest childhood memory is I was born in Taiwan. I immigrated to the U.S. when I was 3. But my earliest memory of Taiwan is this very snippet of a memory where I was suffering from a very severe flu and was very feverish. And, you know, what they did in those days was to like bundle you up and try to sweat out a fever. And I remember being just like drenched in sweat. And then somehow the fever broke and my mom came in and took me out on the balcony. And I just remember the fresh, cool air blowing over me, feeling safe in my mom's arms and looking out over Taipei. And just one little snippet on that. I visited with my extended family, my brother-in-laws and sisters, back to Taiwan just a few months ago. And we somehow, through a magical confluence of GPS, Google Maps, and an old photo, we actually ended up in that very building looking upon that very balcony with the railing. And it just brought back that memory. So that's why it's so fresh in my mind.
Wow, remarkable. So you said your family immigrated when you were 3?
Correct.
Yeah. Do you have any vivid early memories about the immigration process and coming into a new country?
Well, you know, memories are funny because early memories in particular, because you sort of get a little confused. What's an actual memory
Right.
and what's a photograph that you just have? And that now becomes a memory.
Right.
I have a photograph of us landing in Chicago. And I do think I remember that moment. And I remember seeing my dad for the first time in 2 years because he immigrated to the States ahead of us to prepare the way. And I remember hiding behind my mom because I wasn't sure I would recognize him. Because remember, he left when I was a year and a half old. And then when my mom pointed out, that's your dad, I ran over to hug him. But it was this sort of moment of like, is he going to remember me? Am I going to remember him?
When you think about that experience, I mean, the notion of cultural displacement, do you remember any sort of experience early on of cultural displacement, or would that be something that only perhaps an older adult would have experienced?
No, very much so. I remember in the playground, this is the 70s, and fellow playmates, fellow students making the slanty-eyed move, you draw your eyes at me, calling me and things like that. So that's pretty displacing, Lee.
Yeah,
So.
Indeed. Yeah. How would you, if you kind of abstract out of some of those early experiences into the work that you've done with your life, how would you think in terms of your experience as an immigrant having informed the things that are very important to you in the work that you've done?
Well, immigrant to succeed in a new society, new culture, and eventually, as I have, when I was 8, become a citizen of that state and a full-fledged member of that culture, while at the same time having your past and also a present reality of being in a Chinese American community, eating Chinese food, speaking Chinglish in our house. Even as that term Chinglish suggests, you end up being a bridge person. You end up bridging two cultures, and that's your essential reality. You're formed to be that kind of person. And I think that has formed me in my vocational work. And I can give 2 examples of that. In my career as a consultant, running a consulting firm that served nonprofits, my firm's business model that I came up with was to take these Silicon Valley professionals who had all of these professional skills in marketing, strategy, technology. And I was a pastor at that time. I changed roles from being a pastor to running this consulting firm precisely because as a pastor, I felt like my congregation, who are all made of Silicon Valley professionals, were disconnected from using their professional skills to serve the secular world, so that their Christian faith was something that happened on Sunday morning, but didn't connect with the world of secular civic institutions like the homeless shelter, like the after-school program, the environmental nonprofit. And I really wanted to bridge that. I really felt like my own sense of calling, sense of who I was wired, my faith, should be this bridge between the world of faith and the world of, secular nonprofits doing good for the common good. And so my firm was created to bridge that and bring those skills and expertise from the world of faith, the world of church, and really bring it in service to the wider common good. So that's just one example. I can give more, and we can talk more about that particular bridging dynamic in my life.
Yeah, right. To what degree do the experiences of being an immigrant in your mind, how often are you aware of that? Or how I mean, I guess, and, I would make up that there's the, perhaps if you go back to Taiwan, you're not quite Taiwanese enough, Chinese enough. And here in the States, you're not quite American enough. I don't know. Is that a fair description, or how do you experience that on an ongoing basis?
I certainly experienced in going back to Taiwan that I was not. I sensed that I was not Chinese enough. Just struggling with language, I like to say I have about 5 minutes of Chinese Mandarin fluency, and then it just collapses. And the problem is, when you go to Taiwan or China, as I've done also, I'm good enough in that first 5 minutes that then the conversation on the other end goes blah 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 blah, and I'm lost, right? So I definitely experienced that. I embrace fully the belief and conviction that immigrants helped make America and are fully Americans. To quote Hamilton the musical, immigrants, we get the job done. And I feel like I am fully American, and that to be Chinese American does not subtract or remove the American part of it. And so, we're living in a political moment where there are movements, perhaps even political leaders who want to degrade that sense of immigrants being fully American, but I resist it. I'm claiming my full American identity.
So then in time you go to Harvard as a maybe somewhat idealistic young man. At least I've read an account maybe that indicated that maybe you thought of yourself that way, wanting to learn about democracy. So, and you study government, I understand?
That's right.
Yeah. Talk to us about kind of the drive of pushing you in that direction.
Yeah. Again, I felt like this is my country. This is my society. I want to contribute to it. And that's why I majored in government, or political science, more broadly as it's known. And I actually, when I growing up, my first ambition was, I want to be a president. I want to be the president. I want to become a president of America. Then I discovered at some point in the Constitution, oh, wait a minute, I can't be a president because I wasn't naturally born. So what's next best? So I grew up in the 70s, and my role model was Henry Kissinger. So German born, not a natural born, but shaping clearly, he's on TV regularly, shaping the role of America in the United States. So that was my role model. And that's why I went to Harvard. Kissinger, I mean, not the only reason, but when I arrived, Kissinger went to Harvard, as an immigrant, was a government major. There were professors in the department who actually had taught Kissinger. And so that was my dream. Like, I'm going to be the Chinese American Henry Kissinger.
Yeah. Now I understand perhaps that you began to think somewhat differently as well about Christian faith when you're at Harvard?
Yeah, again, this sort of speaks to my bridge identity, because in many ways, my Christian spiritual formation growing up was in a very conservative, quasi-fundamentalist church, which really at that time just sort of sequestered off faith from the wider world. There just wasn't a connection between, here's what your faith means as a citizen, as a participant, as a potential next Henry Kissinger. So it was really divided, and so when I went to school, it was like my faith was in this one compartment of my life and was part of the Christian fellowship and went to church and so forth. And then my classes, studies, aspirations in a different part of my life. And one of the revolutionary things that happened for me in my college years was I began to see that, no, these two worlds are meant to be integrated. And the life of integrating and connecting in a way that both sides, both the world of faith and the world of secular institutions, that both are blessed when those two worlds can be properly integrated. Not one dominating the other, but one and each one blessing the other.
I mean, that's a fairly significant theological shift. What were some of the sources or precipitating moments that led to that?
Well, one is I fell in my freshman year with a bunch of, I guess you would describe them as deeply Christian, deeply political, and deeply Black of Christians, a group that I just sort of fell in with. And they were the first ones who introduced to me a theology, a way of thinking about God that was really holistic, that cared about the world, cared about the poor and the oppressed, along with the other things that I'd been brought up to care about as a, kind of fundamentalist evangelical. And it just was like, oh, all of these things can hold together. God is both the God of my private life, of piety, of prayer, of church going, and also the God of the world out there, the world where justice matters, where caring for the poor, where, public health, like all of this matters.
Was that those friends that you fell in with informed by somebody like James Cone, like a liberation theology, or what were some of their theological
That was a
sources?
thread. So these are people who read James Cone, for those, who don't know him, like a very sort of Christian, what you would call liberation theology, very, attentive to the Gospels, attention on the poor. But they were also people of prayer. They were not political, only. They were also deeply faithful folks. So it was a model for me of how these two things can both be held together. And
then subsequently, you're a pastor. Is it as a pastor when you began doing some reconciliation work in South Africa?
I was not a pastor. I had gotten a fellowship, a Rockefeller fellowship, to go to South Africa, and then I chose to use that fellowship, to live and work in Soweto, South Africa, biggest black township there, at the tail end of apartheid. So it was 92. So I was actually, if you want to talk about being an illegal immigrant, which I was not in America, but in South Africa, technically I was an illegal immigrant because only blacks should have been living in Soweto according to apartheid. And I was a Chinese American, and that was a quite a bit of anomaly there. So much so that whenever I walked out in the streets of Soweto, I would be surrounded by a little mob of black Sowetan children doing kung fu moves around me, because that was the only context they had for a Chinese face. So,
what are things that stand out to you about that season of your life that you began to see, or that you carried with you from that point forward?
When I entered that, I had just graduated, and I was really torn vocationally between whether I was called to go into ministry or whether I was called to go into academia, become a secular professor, or professor in the secular academic world. And I carried that sense of being torn going into that year. And being part of that small church, which was one of the few interracial churches at that time, and as far as I could tell, the only interracial church where the white members of the church would travel onto the black Christian turf, onto Soweto. They would travel into Soweto to worship together. And I just found that very moving. I found that to be a sign, a symbol of what the new South Africa could be. It was straining to come into being, but was in deep pains in that moment of the end of apartheid, whether that new multiracial democratic South Africa would be born. And I just got a vision of the church could be an embodiment. The church could be a expression, a foretaste of what God's desires, was for South Africa, in my belief, which was to be a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. And that little church, really no more than maybe 30, 40 folks, to me was like, I want to be part of this kind of signpost to a reality that God desires. And that's what led me to be in my first vocational move. This is before I became a consultant. And even before what I'm doing now, that was my first sort of vocational sense of calling to be a pastor.
I mean, already numerous times in your storytelling you shared with us, you've alluded both to the personal, spiritual realities and practices, as well as the public, social, political implications of faith. And obviously, I don't know about obviously, often those two don't always get brought up in the same conversation, and yet you're holding on to those in a way that I find compelling. And one of the areas that you've written about and talked about a lot that goes back to the personal space is your work on anxiety. So tell us how that comes to the fore, or maybe even, and I don't know, I wonder maybe if we should flash back to earlier life and ask, when did you first begin to realize maybe you have some work to do on anxiety in your life?
I don't think I could have named that growing up, but looking back, I realized I was actually a deeply anxious child, teenager, young adult, middle-aged adult, and even now, really. And I didn't have the categories, but looking back, I grew up with a considerable amount of anxiety. And the thing was, I actually think a lot of that anxiety fueled my ambition, fueled my energy to become somebody that could go to Harvard, for instance. And again, I this is in retrospection, I could sort of see that. But I would say, Lee, that even my work on anxiety, I did not do that work purely to stay in the Christian world. I began that work in 2020, right after the pandemic broke. And it was out of the realization that our whole society was deeply anxious in that moment. If you can dial back your memory to what early 2020 felt like, I mean, that was just a deeply anxious moment that spanned whether you were of a particular faith or not. And so that led me to reflect both on my personal history as an individual who is anxious, but also, as a Christian, like trying to ask the question, is there something in the Christian tradition, in the Christian faith, in the Christian scriptures that could be a voice of good news to not just Christians, but to anyone struggling with anxiety? And that essential message was, anxiety is so often categorized as a problem in our lives, in our society, to make go away. And I wanted to bring what I think is a really important insight from Jesus himself, but from Scripture, is that anxiety is not a problem to make go away. It's actually an opportunity for growth, for spiritual growth, for emotional growth, for relational growth. But that's why I titled my book, The Anxiety Opportunity. I wanted to reframe anxiety from a problem that we want to push away, make go away, medicate away, to actually enter it, experience it. It's uncomfortable, but to actually go through it as an opportunity for growth.
Talk to us a little bit more about how it could be an opportunity, or how does one frame it such that it is an opportunity?
There's a lot of ways, but let me give you one example. And it speaks to my own childhood and teenagerhood that I just recounted, right? I did not realize that so much of my energy in the world was actually driven by anxiety. And when you don't realize that, it leaks. All sorts of the anxiety leaks. It leaks out in my own sort of personal life, but it really leaks out into others, So early on, when I was a leader in ministry as a pastor, again, I didn't fully name that reality. I didn't fully recognize. So I would lead in very strong, forceful ways that other people would interpret, wow, Curtis is a hard driving leader. When in reality, the emotional core of that was I was anxious. I was and so I wanted to control things. I wanted to make sure things happened in order to respond to my anxiety. And I think I did a lot of damage to myself, but to people around me, to my staff, because I didn't realize that. Now, having more awareness of, wow, this is driving that, it's actually an opportunity for me to lead better. For me to lead not out of a drive to somehow deal with my own anxiety, but for instance, to have compassion on the people I lead, to recognize they're anxious as well. And how can we name that together? How can we recognize what's at the core of that anxiety? And Lee, at the core of anxiety, if you sort of look at it as not a problem to go away, but really as an opportunity for growth, at the core of every one of ours, common experience of anxiety is some fear. It's some fear of loss. That's what drives anxiety. It's a fear of, frankly, future loss. So when you can name that, what am I afraid of? And what future scenario am I imagining that fear becoming reality. It's not, it's becoming reality in the future, right? And so it just gives you the ability to actually face it. Like, oh, I'm afraid of looking bad. I'm afraid of my church shrinking and me not getting to get my salary paid. Like that was a fear. That was like really, I'm kind of embarrassed to name it, but that was present, and if you can face that, there's just a lot of ways that leads to growth. It leads me to like, oh, I gotta like actually learn how to trust, learn how to trust God, learn how to trust the people around me, and not give into this fear.
You noted a moment ago that perhaps until we're given language, we may not be able to see our anxieties. What kind of language, let me back up. If someone's listening and they think, oh, I've got something going on in me, but I don't really know what it is, how would you suggest they might do some introspection, ask themselves certain questions to see if they need to identify anxiety and thus whatever fears may be driving them?
Well, one is what I just described, is like trying to do some inner awareness work, either by yourself or with a therapist or with just your spouse. Like, what's behind these symptoms of anxiety? What do I fear? And then also, what time scenario am I living in? Because if you really sort of do a look at it, it's not the fear of some loss that is happening right now in the present. It's you're getting hijacked into the future. You're living in the future. Your mind and body are sort of indwelling an imaginary future where that loss is happening. And that's what you're afraid of, right? So just getting some of that language, like, okay, if anxiety is a hijack in the future of some feared loss, can you name that loss? Can you name that fear? And then can you also recognize, oh, I'm living in the future. How do I get back into the present? How do I live as a more present-oriented person? Those are just some examples of awareness and moves you can make that in which anxiety actually leads you to become a more thriving, fruitful human being.
You've done lots of work in trying to help American Christians navigate their own anxieties and fear with regard to American politics. How would you narrate, or what story would you employ to give an account for how it's seemingly we find American Christians with such deep anxiety shaping their American engagement?
Well, I don't think you can understand the current political moment if you don't understand anxiety. And again, anxiety is a future scenario of feared loss. And so this anxiety really occupies both the right, left, middle, whatever you want to call it, all along the political spectrum. So take an example on like, say, the conservative, as conservatism is now being practiced, and on the right, let's say, there's a fear of loss. If you dig deep into what's going on, it's a fear of, there's going to be imposed on me a set of sexual practices that I makes me afraid. I don't want it. There's going to be a secularization such that my kids are not going to grow up Christians. And so we gotta seize governmental power to change culture, to protect us from this, onslaught of gender or sexual policies, right? Now, the key thing to know is there's a germ of actual like true fear in it, but when we not aware, like, oh, that's actually what I'm afraid of, it kind of metastasizes and mushrooms up into all sorts of things, such that you're now like, we got to seize power in order to guard against this future loss. Let me go on the left, right? There's this sort of fear like, oh my gosh, religion is looming its head as a presence in life. That's going to mean people are going to, shove things down my throat, sort of religious, conservative values. And again, there's a germ of truth, because that is like starting to brew in conservative circles, but it's overblown. There's actually, there's not as many Christians that view that way as that fear on the left believes, but it causes them to adopt politics that is our highly oppositional, that castigate, that stereotype the political opponents they fear. So you have to understand this anxiety pervasively influences our politics. And that is why I, along with David French and Russell Moore, created this project, which has a book, a video course, and even a worship album to try to help us as Christians become more aware of that and engage in politics across the political spectrum, not with fear, but with faith.
We'll come back to some questions, follow-up questions about your project with Russell and David here in just a moment. But let me ask, how do you think that, or why do you think that so many Christians in the U.S. Seem to be caring about such a deep distrust of institutions as such?
This is another passion topic of mine, Lee, you're naming exactly. I believe the reason why so many Christians across the political spectrum have this deep distrust of institutions is both something real and something, let's call it spiritual, and it's spiritual formation of how we as Christians have been formed to think about God, about the world, and so forth. So let me talk first about what's real. In reality, our institutions have, in some very meaningful ways, failed us. Again, both on the right and the left. We are living in an era of institutional fragility where you can look out and say, this institution's not doing that. This institution's not doing that. This institution's not failing. There's pervasive examples. Silicon Valley corporations just running ramshod with AI and not, sort of caring about the wider society. Our economic institutions that are not lifting up our next generation in a way that they can have lives better than ours. Like there's widespread failure of institutions. So that's real. But the problem is, and I'm going to speak here explicitly as a Christian here, right? But I think this is a spiritual reality that everyone faces, which is we do not think of institutions as human. We don't think of them. We think of them as a object, as a tool. And so when a tool fails you, Lee, like when a hammer breaks and splinters, we, both as Christians and just all citizens, we don't think, I should repair this tool. I should redeem. That's using Christian language. I should repair and redeem and heal this hammer. What do we think? No, we throw that hammer out because it's much easier to get on Amazon a $9.99 hammer, right? Because it's just a tool. Let's just get another tool. And we approach institutions that way. It's a thing. And so when it fails us, we distrust and reject and throw it out, throw it out into the garbage because it isn't giving us what we want or need. But let me ask you, both as a Christian and as just a human being, suppose your best friend failed you in some way. They didn't come through in the way that they didn't show up in the way they were supposed to show up, and so forth. Would you, or your spouse did that, right? Would you just say, well, forget that person, let's chuck that person into the garbage? I don't think you would, right?
Right.
And as a human being, whatever your religious faith, we've just you don't do that to other human beings. As a Christian, you especially don't do that because you have been formed to know that other individual is a human being made in the image of God. And so they have an inherent worth and dignity beyond what they deliver to you instrumentally, right? My argument and belief, which I believe is deeply biblical, deeply scriptural, is that human beings represent, they image God as individuals, certainly, and as institutions. They do that institutions are the collective human imaging of God. And the Bible very much teaches that the imaging of God an expression of human dignity and worth is not just the individual exercise. It is also collective. It is also something we do together. And that's what an institution is. It's human. An institution is made of human beings. It's not a thing. It's a human reality. It's a human collective expression of humanity that is meant really to image something of God to all people. A hospital is an image of God as a healer. In fact, and Christians actually, early Christians were the ones who created the hospital, this institution known as a hospital, out of a sense of, well, if we're going to heal people, which we're called to do in imaging Jesus, the great healer, right? We can't do that alone. We need this thing called a hospital. Again, notice how I slipped up there. I said a thing, right? No, we need a collective expression of humanity that we are going to call a hospital. And that's what's going to enable us to actually bring healing into not just Christians, but the wider Roman society. That's what was the vision of the early hospital. That, in plagues where the typical Roman would just flee the city, Christians, no, we're going to stay. The sociologist Rodney Stark really documents this historically. We're going to stay and be an agent of healing. And to do that, we need to do it together. And what are we going to call that collective exercise? It's going to be a hospital. And so a school is an institution that is a collective expression of human teachers, human parents who bring their kids to this, a human counselor, a human principal that's come together and say, we want to educate our people and we can't do that alone. And so we got to do it together. And we're going to create this human being, a human being in the collective sense of being, called a school. And so this is why, and so because we don't think then, let me circle back now, because we don't think and we don't have an imagination spiritually or otherwise, we don't have an imagination that an institution is deeply human. That's why when it fails, we just chuck it, we distrust it, we throw it out, and we don't have a posture in the Christian sense of redeeming, of redemption, or more secularly, of repair. That these are human beings that are, sure, they're broken, but they're not to be chucked out. They are meant to be repaired and redeemed. And that natural impulse that we have to an individual really needs to be extended to human beings in the collective sense of the word being, which is an institution.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp here. At No Small Endeavor, we spend a lot of time talking about a good life. But the truth is, a good life is not something we can figure out alone. It's something we discover together in community. That's why we created Endeavor Together. Endeavor Together helps small groups gather to talk about the big questions of life using episodes of the No Small Endeavor podcast. Each series is a simple 4-week guide with questions, short videos, and prompts designed to spark meaningful conversation. We've just released our newest series called A Good Life. It's a 4-part exploration of what it means to pursue a life worth living in community. Here's how it works. Participants listen to a podcast episode ahead of time, then gather with a group to talk it through. We provide the framework for great conversation. The best part is, thanks to our friends at the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, it's completely free. You can explore A Good Life along with our other conversation series like Let's Disagree Better and Vulnerability by visiting nosmallendeavor.com or clicking the link in the show notes. Lee C. Camp here. If you're enjoying this show, I'd love to tell you about a new podcast from Tokens Media called The Subtext. Each week, I sit down with Savannah Locke, a self-admitted pop culture expert, and she helps me catch up on everything I've missed, which, given that I do not own a cell phone, is quite a bit. In fact, Savannah was very pleased to teach me about the fact that Taylor Swift had gotten engaged about 6 weeks after it happened. So on The Subtext, Savannah brings a pop culture moment celebrity drama, internet debates, viral shows, and together we ask a deeper question. Why does any of this actually matter? What does it reveal about our culture, our theology, and the lives that we are living online and in the public square? And how might we, as Christians, enjoy the world in ways that reflect truth, beauty, and goodness? It's a conversation between someone who lives very much on the internet and someone who lives a lot off of it. And that tension makes for surprisingly meaningful dialogue. If you're looking for a place to begin, I'd suggest our recent episode on the rival Super Bowl halftime shows, a fascinating conversation. So follow the subtext on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and join us as we look beneath the headlines and beyond the obvious. I want to imagine for a moment that someone's listening and they buy what you said so far. That a more to re-envision institutions as deeply human entities of some sort, rather than just mere things and thus easily discardable. But I also would imagine that it's the experience of a lot of folks that institutions of whatever stripe always seem, or maybe I'm using too strong language, often seem, maybe always seem, to multiply some of the worst parts of humanity. I'm thinking, for example, of, Reinhold Niebuhr's famous book, Moral Man, Immoral Society. And then I remember him saying at the end of his life that if he was going to retitle that book, he would have called it Immoral Man, More Immoral Society. It just said that the societal embodiments of humankind always seem to multiply the ugly parts of us. I don't know, but what do you do? What do you do with that?
I think institutions are exactly right. They multiply humanity. They are an expression of the Genesis 1 commandment from God: go out into the world and multiply, right? And that means multiply not just in individual numbers, but multiply the human presence, multiply the human impact on the world. Now, we as Christians believe in this reality called the fall, which is all humanity is both reflective of God and also distorts that image of God. They are broken, right? So you're absolutely right. Human institutions are like this multiplier. They multiply what is both good and right and God designed about humanity, and the ways in which humanity is broken, is fallen, and needs redemption and repair. You're exactly right. But don't lose sight of the multiplication of the good. Again, Lee, you break your leg or you get cancer, God forbid, or something like that, right? You're not going to be able to heal yourself. You're not going to be able to, even your neighbor's not going to be able to heal you. Your healing of a broken leg or cancer, again, just to use my analogy, relies on institutions. And by the way, I have good friends who are suffering from cancer right now. They are dependent on this whole long chain of institutions for their life, for healing or prolonging their life. Not just the hospital, but like medical colleges that train those doctors and nurses and so forth. The drugs they're taking, it's not like some individual cooked them up in their garage. It took a massive set of institutions, universities to do the research, the FDA to test and approve, drug companies who will distribute, their supply chain, the pharmacy, right? It's like this whole long chain of institutions that I believe reflect some aspect of God, even if they're not, and most of them are, almost all of them are not explicitly Christian, but they still reflect something of God's design for humanity to thrive by multiplying their impact. Without institutions, that good, that deep good is not possible. Now, of course, that also means they multiply the bad. These institutions make room for corruption, for somebody to, some institution to run a drug scam or whatever, right? Like, of course. But that's true of every human reality. That's true of you and me. We multiply in the world something really good, and we multiply in the world some things that are bad. That's just human reality. So institutions are no better. They're just a multiplier of both the good and the bad.
What first got you especially interested in this particular topic is worth a lot of your attention?
I would go back to my sense of just being created to be a bridge person. So it came out of this first career that I had, which was in ministry, in the world of faith, in the world of being a pastor, in the world of theology, thinking about God. And then I had the second career stage of running a secular consulting firm serving secular institutions, nonprofits, government agencies, hospital shelters, all of that, like systems of institutions. So I went from a world of faith and then a world of deeply embedded caring about trying to redeem. That's really what my consulting firm was trying to do. I didn't put it in that language, but we were trying to repair and redeem institutions as institutions. And so my third career stage, which I'm in now, was like trying to bridge those two things. So I've had deep experience in faith, deep experiences with institutions in the secular world. How do those two connect? And that's what led me to, really my current work as the, founder and executive director and of Good Faith, and a comrade and colleague of you in the podcast world, in our own podcast, Good Faith. And the mission of Good Faith really is to try to be that bridge to help both sides see how each of us, worlds of faith, world of institutions, are meant to bless one another.
Well, that's a great segue to talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing now. It seems that one of the things that you're saying, for example, in your after party project that you mentioned a moment ago, is perhaps more a focus on the how of politics as opposed to the what of politics. So unpack that for us a bit.
When I say the word politics, I think the vast majority of minds out there go immediately to what I would call the what of politics. So what policies are the right policy? And I'm going to speak as a Christian, like what policies are the Christian policies on, immigration, abortion, religious liberty, gender and sexuality, or economics, pick your issue. It's immediately the what. What is the substantive policy that's the quote unquote right policy? Or what party is the right party that should be in power? What should my vote go to? What candidate should presidential candidate is the candidate that I should vote for? I'm not saying that's not important, or that even our ideological or our religious convictions should shape that what. But what we neglect when I say the word politics is the how. That politics is as much, and I would say in some ways more, about how we treat each other, how we resolve our differences, which are going to be there, how we resolve enmity. And so like that, all those sets are how we do that are true regardless of the what you hold. And the central argument, the central truth that the after party is trying to advance is that in actuality, you can trace a much straighter line from Jesus' teaching, say on the Sermon on the Mount, to the how of politics versus the what. Read the Sermon on the Mount. You can try to say there's a line that I can draw there to like what should be our policy on the border, but man, it's a fuzzy line and it's very circuitous. And guess what? Somebody else could draw a very different line and it could be pretty much equally plausible as the line you're trying to draw. So the Sermon on the Mount does not tell us very much about specific policy on any issue, frankly. But it has a lot to say on the how. Do not lie. So don't foster or spread any mistruth. Be really committed to truth when you engage in any discussion on these issues. Be really committed to truth. Be really committed to loving your enemy. Right? That's crucial to the Sermon on the Mount. Do not mock your opponents. Do not say raka, right? Which is the Hebrew word for you idiot, you moron, you fool. And so like, what are you posting on social media? Are you posting some equivalent of mocking, of saying, look at these morons, look at these idiots on the other side? Those are all how practices that are like a straight line that you can draw from just the Sermon on the Mount to very important how practices in politics. So that's what we're trying to show, trying to demonstrate, and trying to encourage that's got to be a deeply Christian exercise of politics.
you said a moment ago on distinguishing the how and the what, that you're not downplaying the significance of the what. But I'm thinking, say you've got in the civil rights era, there is a lot of emphasis on the how. You've got Dr. King, for example, embracing nonviolence, and the love of enemies is very significant elements of the how. But there's also a very clear what, right? There's a very clear, we must reject Jim Crow manifestations of white supremacy. In your mind, when does one rightfully hold those together, or how do you think about drawing the line between the how and the what?
You've just named, I think, a so important, vital contribution of Black Christians to our history and our faith broadly, regardless of your race and any other identity. Like that civil rights movement is a perfect example of how you wed the how and the what. You can't separate in King and the civil rights movement at its best. You cannot separate the what and the how. Those were both equally important to King, right? He would have rejected, and he did reject, the sheer use of force to get a otherwise good what. Like he explicitly said, we cannot use violence, for instance, to just grab enough power to impose our vision of what, like, society, and specifically Southern society, should be like. We have to hold the how of nonviolence, the how of love of your enemies, the love of the need to show mercy. And all of this is completely inseparable, completely integrated in the civil rights movement. I think that should be a prophetic vision for us Christians today of how we engage in politics, and that you can't separate those two. And too much what happens is that people are willing, Christians and otherwise, are willing to sacrifice their best, highest instincts on the how in order to win on the what. And so it's the by any means necessary. Which was a temptation that was in the civil rights movement, the by whatever means necessary is Malcolm X's famous phrase, right? So that's always going to be a temptation, is to sacrifice the how at the altar of what. And I think we as a society, and definitely we as Christians, need to reject that sacrifice.
You, in the after party, you all use the practices of hope and humility as central practices, and make a case for the importance of trying to hold together both high hope and high humility. And then you kind of lay out in a grid kind of different places you might fall depending upon how much high or low you are in each of hope or humility. And yet you label yourself in that grouping of four a cynic. So tell us about how'd you become a cynic, and how do you think you are having to navigate that, or how do you combat that in yourself?
Yeah, so I won't try to replicate, this quadrant, which I love because I think it's so helpful.
I will say as well, I think it's also very helpful. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This is an expression of my low humility. It's awesome. It's the greatest thing ever. You should go out and buy The After Party because it's like the best book ever written. The cynic is how I describe it, is low in humility and low in hope. So it's low in humility. Well, it's low in hope. Right? Because as a cynic, you think everything's awful and nothing can make it better. So I'm low in hope, and I'm also low in humility because guess what? I'm right about that analysis. I'm right. Anybody that thinks differently is a raka. And so I am low in humility because I think I've got it, and that got it is like everything is terrible. So I don't know how I became a cynic. I'm not sure. And it's a temptation, right? It's a temptation to be a cynic that I'm talking about. I'm not saying that that's good or right, or I need to move from that cynic position. Maybe it has to do with like doing so much academic study of social reality and politics, right? Because I mean, academia as its practice is kind of a cynic cynic's paradise. Like you're taught to analyze things.
Right.
And when you analyze things, it's just like you're finding the flaw. You're finding the deep structural wrong. And so I've been kind of shaped to look at the world that way. And, by my academic work. And so I think that sort of naturally leads to this sort of low in hope, because there's always some deep structural wrong or hidden wrong that, by the way, I've uncovered. That's my thesis. That's my doctoral dissertation. That's my book. That's how academia is structured. Is I've got it. So it's a low humility exercise almost by definition. So I think that was a key formative influence for me to become somebody that's low in humility and low in hope.
How are you finding?
Which is a cynic.
Yeah. What practices or relationships are you finding that help you combat that?
It's a great question. I think interacting with people who are smarter than me helps me address the low humility thing. That's why I love, being friends with David French and Russell Moore and doing the after party with them and having his guests on our podcast. I just interact with them a lot, and they're smarter than me. Both of them are definitely smarter than me. And it's an honor to just relate to them, and it helps me be more humble.
Yeah.
And then I think hope, what's a good practice of hope? I think for me, it's prayer as the central practice, because in prayer, I am led to see God as the one who holds all of humanity, not me, not even any human institution. It's God. And I can hope in God.
Yeah.
I can hope that God is the great Redeemer as revealed in Jesus. And that's the reason for our hope.
Clearly, American Christianity is a mess right now. How are you hoping in the midst of the realities of all those messes?
Well, there's a famous saying, attributed to a lot of folks. I think it is rightly attributed to this great theologian named Leslie Newbigin. And he was asked this question, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And Leslie's response was, I am neither. I believe in the resurrection. And what he means by that is, hey, if you're looking for optimism defined as just things are going to get better in the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or some horizon, or if you're a pessimist and you're thinking, man, things are just going to keep worse and worse getting next year or the following year and so forth. If you think on that time horizon, I as a Christian don't think on that time horizon, because I believe in this historical reality that I believe in called the resurrection. And the core message of the resurrection is already God in Jesus has defeated the force of decay and death. But it hasn't been fully enacted yet. It's been defeated in some ultimate sense in the cross in Jesus. It just hasn't been implemented yet. And it won't be fully implemented until the final resurrection, when all of us human beings, and by the way, I really do believe that resurrection of that human being includes institutions, okay? Which is, I know, a radical thought for many, but it is going to be a grand resurrection of all human reality, both individual and collective. And that's when this victory over death, decay, injustice, and wrong, and disease and death, is going to be finally redeemed, finally healed, finally repaired. And so that's the time horizon. And we don't know when that's going to happen, when that we know the first resurrection happened, some 2,000 years ago, or we believe that. And I think history has a lot of evidence to point to that truth. But we have zero guidance for when the second final resurrection that encompasses all of collective humanity. But that's my hope. I'm hoping in that. So am I an optimist or a pessimist in the next 5, 10, 15 years? I neither. I don't know what's going to happen. I believe in the resurrection.
You've made your living in many ways by generating words. Do you get exhausted, just tired of trying to find new words?
I don't know. I like to talk.
Yeah.
Lee, I like talking with you. So I got a lot of words in me.
And what fuels that ongoing desire to keep talking in a way that tries to point people to some new possibility?
Lee, again, I cannot help be a person that bridges Christian language with secular language. So here's a word that I hope does that bridge. It's the word prophetic. And so there's an identity in the Christian tradition that's called a prophet. And by that just means like, I am called to bring God's word into the world for everyone, like certainly for the people of faith, but it's a word that has implications, has ramifications for the people of faith. Engage, interact, bless the wider world. That's the role of the prophet. I just have this sense that, I was made by God. I was created by God to be a prophet, and by the way, the Christians have, and the Jewish scriptures have this, sort of categorization. Actually, I don't know if it's the Jews or the Christians that impose this, but it's like major or minor prophets, right? There's the big ones, Isaiah, Ezekiel. There's the minor ones, Joel, Amos. Like I'm a prophet in the minor sense of that word. Like I'm like in the grand scheme of things, I'm a very, very little, but like that's how God created me, is to bring the word of God as best as I can discern it, as best as I can ascertain it, and somehow translate it to be hearable by the people, first the people of God, and then as it flows out into the world. So if you're a prophet, like you're trying to be responsive to the word and the specific words that surround the word, the big message. So I hope I'm hearing and spreading the right words. That's a hope. That's another expression of hopefully hope, and hopefully getting better on the humility front. But that's my hope, is that I can bring a word that in my little corner of the world that I have influence brings people to hope.
I think I read that you have been practicing contemplative prayer. Is that correct?
That's right.
What's that practice look like for you, and what's it meant to you?
Contemplative prayer is a deeply ancient Christian practice that's really oriented, interestingly enough, not around words. It is about silence. It is about stilling your mind that, in my mind, otherwise is filled with so many words. And it is quieting, silencing that mind to just be silenced, out of a belief that God does speak through words, certainly, and through silence and wordlessly. I think I have gravitated to the practice of contemplative prayer precisely because my mind otherwise is filled with so many words, and my work in the world is filled with so many words, that I can over-index on the wordy aspect of faith and life in the world. And so I need to balance that with wordlessness, with silence. And that's the essence of what contemplative prayer is.
For those who are unfamiliar, can you give any more description of what the shape of that practice, or how one leans into that or experiments with that?
No, Lee, because as practitioners of contemplative prayer, we're called the silence. So I'm not going to cover that with any words. It's if you're interested, dive deeper. I don't have any words for it.
Yeah, thank you. Been lovely to talk to you, Curtis. Thank you so much for your work, and we're grateful. Where would you like for folks to find more about what you're up to these days?
Best place is to go to goodfaith.org, and you can then sample our podcast, our weekly podcast called Good Faith, the courses we have on anxiety, on politics, on institutions. We've got 3 courses on exactly those 3 topics: anxiety, politics, and institutions. You can take a course. You can get a book, buy our book. We currently have a book I've written, both one on anxiety called The Anxiety Opportunity, one on politics called The After Party. You can check out especially the After Party Project, which has a video course, a book, as I've said, and a worship album. So find all of that on goodfaith.org. How's that for a plug?
That's a great plug. Great place to end.
All right.
Thank you, Curtis. Great to be with you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
This summer, serve up the Cookout Classics, Oscar Mayer hot dogs and Heinz mustard. Grill up a dog, add classic yellow mustard, or loaded Chicago style. We all know it's not a cookout without Oscar Mayer and Heinz.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Cats, this ad is for you. Has your human ever called you picky, persnickety, choosy? If so, Perfect Bistro Cat Food is for you. With ingredients like wild-caught tuna and pasture-raised lamb, tantalizing textures, and delectable flavors that meet even the most discerning cat standards. You're not picky, you're just perfectionists. Perfect Bistro, mealtime perfection for every cat. Have your human visit perfectbistro.com.
Visible puts the ultimate wireless hack in the palm of your hand. With unlimited 5G wireless data and hotspot designed to keep you connected, powered by Verizon's 5G network. And no contract holding you back. Plans start at $25 a month, or get the premium Visible Plus Pro plan and save $10 on your first month when you use promo code HACK. Make the switch at Visible.com. Terms apply. See Visible.com for details.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.
Lee C. Camp here. If you're enjoying this show, I'd love to tell you about a new podcast from Tokens Media called The Subtext. Each week, I sit down with Savannah Locke, a self-admitted pop culture expert, and she helps me catch up on everything I've missed, which, given that I do not own a cell phone, is quite a bit. In fact, Savannah was very pleased to teach me about the fact that Taylor Swift had gotten engaged about 6 weeks after it happened. So on The Subtext, Savannah brings a pop culture moment, celebrity drama, internet debates, viral shows, and together we ask a deeper question. Why does any of this actually matter? What does it reveal about our culture, our theology, and the lives that we are living online and in the public square? And how might we, as Christians, enjoy the world in ways that reflect truth, beauty, and goodness? It's a conversation between someone who lives very much on the internet and someone who lives a lot off of it. And that tension makes for surprisingly meaningful dialogue. If you're looking for a place to begin, I'd suggest our recent episode on the rival Super Bowl halftime shows, a fascinating conversation. So follow The Subtext on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and join us as we look beneath the headlines and beyond the obvious.